Hello again. This is the third video in a four-part series on four-part counterpoints. In our first video, which I'll put a link to up here, we discussed why I think four-part harmony or counterpoint is an essential skill for any composer, and various examples throughout classical, film, and game literature. In the second video, we talked about the process of writing four-part harmony and the various rules that make for good and bad counterpoint. Now, it's one thing to talk about rules and process, but it's another thing completely to actually apply them. So in this video, I'm going to show you where you can find a whole bunch of chorales that you can practice harmonizing yourself. Then we're going to pick one at random, and we're going to work through it together, start to finish, and you can see how I solve some of the problems that I will undoubtedly run into along the way. Here's the process for writing four-part harmony that we talked about last time. Now, as you can tell, the first step is we start with a melody. Well, where do you find a melody? Well, on this website, Bachchorales.com, you can find links to every Bach chorale ever written. This is a really great site that I recommend. And you'll notice that right on the front page, you have links to all the chorales. It's really a great website. There's no fluff. You just go straight to the meat of it. So you'll notice that they're organized by BWV and Riemenschneider numbers. Now, BWV is just a catalog of all of Bach's works. So, for example, we can go to BWV 33.6, and it looks something like this. So, great. That's the Bach chorale. You can see exactly how Bach harmonized it, and a bunch of information about it down here. The other numbers that you'll find on here are Riemenschneider numbers. Now, you may say, what's Riemenschneider? So Riemenschneider was actually a person, Alfred Riemenschneider, and one thing that he did is he organized all of the Bach chorales that he knew about, or that he could find, into a big book, a compilation of Bach chorales, and that book now is just called Riemenschneider. Now, if you just go on Amazon and search for Riemenschneider, the very first thing that will come up in the list of search results is the Riemenschneider book right here. So you can see it's really not expensive. It's $17 right now. So you might consider just buying a hard copy. Now, the school where I learned all this stuff had several copies of Riemenschneider, and we would practice just copying out the melody out of one of these chorales and then harmonizing it in the way that I'll show you. That's how we learned. So you can do this if you want, or all of these are also available on that Bachchorales.com website. So why use a Bach chorale as a melody instead of just making up your own melody? Well, you certainly can, and eventually, hopefully, you will do exactly that. But there are two advantages, at least while you're learning, to using Bach chorale melodies. First, Bach was an undisputed master at writing both melodies and harmonization. So, by using a melody that Bach wrote, you know that you're using a really good melody that will require some skill to harmonize. The second thing is that we can take our chorale harmonization after we're done, and then we can go compare notes against what Bach actually did. And we can see exactly how badly we messed up in comparison to what Bach did. And then we can repeat and repeat and repeat. And in time, our harmonizations will hopefully get better and better and closer to what Bach would write, which will in turn improve the melodies that we write. Now, as I mentioned, you don't actually need notation software at all if you want to do this. I'm going to be using Finale and Note Performer simply because if I wrote this out on paper, you wouldn't be able to hear the sounds that it made, even though I can mostly hear them in my head. But you can use MuseScore or Sibelius or Dorico or whatever it is you want to use. But if you just have a piano, you can absolutely just use a piano to do this. Or if you can hear it in your head, then absolutely do it on manuscript paper. Okay, Now I'm going to pick a random chorale here. I'm just going to close my eyes and hover over what I hope are all the Riemann-Schneider numbers and pick one here. Okay, I landed on 294, which is BWV 113.8. Cool. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Finale, and I'm going to transcribe the melody into there, trying my hardest not to actually look at the harmonization that Bach wrote out. Okay, I'm now going to start a new document. Now, one thing that I would recommend is if you're doing this in a notation program or on a digital piano, I would highly recommend not using just a piano sound. That's because a piano sound decays. I would instead use a string or a voice sound because it sustains. Otherwise, at the end of a long note, a long held note, if the chord changes in the middle but one or two voices are held, you may not hear the harmony very well at the tail end of that note. Whereas if people are singing it, or you have it played by instruments in an orchestra like trumpets or flutes or violins or something, then you will absolutely hear a clash on that second or third beat when the note was held in the piano. So for our purposes here, I'm going to choose voices and use two voices with no staff name, just in Finale. BWV, what was this? 113.8. Composer is J.S. Bach, arranged by me. I don't care about copyright for this example. Okay, now we have to figure out what key it's in. Well, I can tell this first chord is a B minor chord, two sharps, so it must be B minor. So I'll choose B minor. It's in 4/4. I find that a quarter note equals 80 is a good tempo for most Bach chorales. And we do have a pickup measure here, you can see right here. So I'm going to choose the same pickup measure. Okay, so a few things I'm going to do to clean up this default document. So first, I'm going to change this to a grand staff. I'm also going to change the clef of this whole thing to a bass clef. And then since I'm going to be entering some Roman numerals, there's a few, and I do that in Finale using lyrics. I'm going to actually make a few changes to the lyric options. So here I'm going to not use smart hyphens, and I'm going to turn off the melismas, because I don't want underlines to appear everywhere where I have a space at the end of a word where there are more notes. And now I will simply transcribe that melody. Okay, one other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the page margins so that this actually fits on the page, because we have a thin margin over here and a wide margin over here, allowing for space for the staves to be labeled, but we don't need that. So I'm going to simply change the page margins here from 1 to 0.5, apply to all pages, and there we go. Now it fits nicely on two systems, and I can delete all these extra bars. Okay, so we have our melody. Now it's time to find the cadences and modulations. Happily, it's really easy to identify cadences in a Bach chorale. He marks each one of them with a fermata. Modulations, though, are a little more difficult, so let's look at those. Okay, so this piece starts out in B minor. Now, if I look at this, this is all pretty diatonic until we get to here, and we can see from this G sharp here that we've probably changed key. And I'm going to guess that here we're in F sharp minor instead, right? Because we've now got a G sharp in addition to the F sharp and C sharp. The key signature. So we've probably gone from B minor into F sharp minor. But then, of course, we want to end in B minor. So, so I think the only modulation we really have to do is to modulate to F sharp by about this point. And then back to B minor by the end, really. But it's a bit boring for this entire thing here to be in B minor. So one thing that I notice is that all of these notes here could easily be harmonized in D major as well as B minor. So what I'm thinking is maybe we'll modulate to D major in the middle here, then back to B minor, then to F sharp minor, then back to B minor. Now I haven't identified exactly where the pivot chords are going to be yet, but I think we've figured out exactly what modulations we want to write. So I'm going to go ahead and put those into the score. Now, in order to do Roman numeral analysis and finale, they have a special font. So in order to use that font, you have to select Finale Numerics. Normally these would go beneath the bass staff, but because I don't have any notes in there at all, I can't really enter any lyrics. So I'm just going to put them here for now. So this will be in B minor. Then over here somewhere we're going to change to D, then back to B minor, then F sharp, then D. Okay, now that we've got our cadences and modulations figured out, we need to figure out what all the chords should be. Okay, now at the beginning here, what I notice is this could just be 1 1 5 1 5 1 5 1. I could do 1 5 1 5 1 5 1. In the bass, that would go something like this. Now that would be extremely boring, so we wouldn't want to do that. We could liven it up a little, and introduce some inversions like something like that, and introduce some passing notes, so like this. But this is still really pretty boring. Just ones and fives here. So, and especially if we really want this to be a perfect cadence here, it really needs to have a subdominant somewhere, a 4 or 2 or something like that in here beforehand. So, let's see if we can improve this. Now, one thing that I'll often do is I will sketch in a bit of a bass line at the cadences. So for example, here this is a very standard Bach bass line here. So this chord this chord is really a 6/4, a cadential 6/4, because it's a first inversion 1 here, also often called a cadential a 5/6/4, because it's almost like a double suspension here. But now what do we do here? So I feel like we have to start on a B, or at least this should be a B. One of these, this or this should be a B. Maybe both. So I think I like this. This has to be a 5 because of that A sharp. Like that's the only chord in B minor that has an A sharp in it. But there are lots of chords that have B's in them, right? You could use a G major chord. You can use an E minor chord. Actually, E minor is good because that's the 4 in B. So let's use that. And then on this one, how do we get back to 1? We could do 5, but we've got 5 there and 5 there. That's a bit too much. So I'm going to do, what are some other chords with C sharps in them? C sharp, diminished chord, like that. That would probably work. And then what would our bass line look like? Maybe... yeah, I think that would work for our first phrase. Okay, now let's move on to the second phrase. So in this one, we wanted this to end in D major. So I'm thinking here this would be a 1, 2, 5. This is a half cadence in D major, so this would be an A major chord, D major chord, and I want an E major 7 in the middle. So that's a nice kind of classic cadence that Bach would use all the time. So let's put that in. Then we will put in the chords for that. So in D major, now I'm on the second line. So now we're in D major, so here I want 1. Oh, I can't type on this syllable because there's no notes. Okay, so I'm going to insert some random notes in the alto just so I can type something on that second beat. Okay, so this would be a 2/7, and this would be a 5, so D, E7, A. Then where exactly do we pivot? I'm thinking we could pivot maybe here. So this could be an E minor chord in D major. I'm not sure about that with the E minor, E major. Well, we'll see how this works, and we can come back and change it later if we need to. Okay, so let's fill in the rest of these chords then. This is a 1 and a 5. Another 5. I don't know. Maybe we make it a 5/7 to make it more, slightly different than the previous chord. I don't really like having 2 5s on the same note following each other. It's a bit boring. So this E minor chord would be 4 in B minor and 2 in D major. Okay, so let's continue filling in these chords. So let's again start with the cadence at the end of this next phrase. So I could just do this again, but I don't know, it's a bit boring to just repeat the same thing twice. So I like having the 1, 5, and then maybe we end with a 6 as a deceptive cadence. I kind of like that. So something like that. So we never put in the numerals for this. Let's do that. This is 1, 5, 6. And then this next cadence really kind of has to be a half cadence. So in F sharp minor, this would be 1, that's F sharp minor, and then 4, which is B minor, and then 5, which is a C sharp major chord. Sorry, this should be minor, not major. So let's put in some notes there. Now I can't do this because I already have a B in the soprano, and that would be parallel motion. So I guess I could do this, right, and put this in first inversion. Okay, now let's fill in the chords in this cadence. So this would be, I really think this in B minor would be, and this has to be a nice big final cadence. So let's make it a nice perfect cadence. 1, 4, 5, 1. And actually I'm going to make this a major 1 because in every Bach chorale he loved to harmonize the last chord of every minor chorale with a major third, a Picardy third. So we'll do that as well. You don't have to do that in your harmonization if you don't want to, but it's kind of nice to end a minor piece on a major chord. Gives it that little ray of sunshine. Something like that would do, I think. Now, what I actually might do on this last chord is I might do a 5 and then a 5, 7 here. So let me put that in. And here, that would be a 5, 7. Okay. Okay, so now we've filled in all the cadences. We have a number of other chords to fill in, so let's do that. Now here we're in D major, so we'll continue on with D major, but we got to figure out some point to transition back into B minor. So I think I'm going to just do a nice 1, 5, 1 at first here, but then I feel like, so this I feel like needs to be an F sharp major chord. Well, okay, so one thing we can do is we can do this little trick where we have some motion in the bass that goes like, I don't know what this is yet, but A sharp, B. And we can do that by putting this as a 5, so an A major chord. And then this chord is actually an F sharp 7 chord. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this pivot point back. So this is a 7 chord in B minor, and this now is a 5-7 chord. Now, notice in none of these except for this one, which I knew was going to be a cadential 6/4, I have not included inversions on any of these chords, just because I haven't written a bass line yet. So I don't know exactly what the inversion is going to be. We can come back in and do that later if we want. I usually honestly don't bother. The chords are just kind of a guide to me, so that later on, when I'm trying to write the inner parts, I don't forget exactly what I was trying to do. Okay, now let's fill in this. So we need to get from G major to F sharp major. Here, this isn't G major. We need to get from B minor to F sharp major. So one thing that we could do is we could get to F sharp minor a little sooner and land on it right here. So we can do that same trick in the bass that we did last time. Like that. And this could be a diminished 7th chord in F sharp minor. That would be actually the E sharp, G sharp, B, D. So there would be an E sharp diminished 7th. So that would actually be a 7, 7, like that. And then this is 1. And what do we do for this? We have to get to 1 here, but I don't really want to use a lot of 4s here. So I could do a 4 here and then treat this A and F sharp as accented passing notes so that this is really the chord tone. I don't know if that's going to work very well, but we can try it. And then something like that. Oh, and I never filled in my bass line here. So we said this would be a 1. So maybe so in contrary motion with the soprano. Oh, and I never filled this in either. Gosh. So let's do that. This is a 4, so this is E minor. Well, I can't do that because that's parallel motion. I guess I could do that. That's pretty weak with a second inversion there. But the alternative is that, which is kind of awkward. I don't know. We'll give it a shot, see how it works, and if it doesn't work, then we'll change it. And then, okay, finally, let's fill in this last bit. So this will be, actually, I put my B minor in the wrong spot here. So this, I think we need to get back to B minor, but that's pretty easy. From F sharp major, we just treat 1 as a dominant. And so here, this is a 5 in B minor. And so we can keep on going. 1, 4, 1. I don't want to do 1 4 1 4 1 4 5. That would be boring. I mean, I could just make this a 5 with a suspension. Well, that's not even a suspension, that's a passing note. Yeah, I can do that. I can make this a 5. Now, it can't actually enter a note there yet because and by the way, those are just dummy notes. I don't actually know what I'm going to put in for the alto yet. This just enables me to actually put in a chord on this fourth beat. And I'll do 5, I think. So let's put in a bass line. Yeah, so I can't do this because, again, this would be parallel motion. And I don't really want this to be a B right after coming out of F sharp minor because it feels too final. So I'm going to make it a first inversion so it feels like it needs to continue onwards. Yeah. Okay. I think that will do for now. Okay, so we've got our chords, we've got a bass line. Now it's time to fill in the inner parts. Now, usually this process is fairly mechanical, but unfortunately this is also where we'll run into a lot of the parallel motion problems and stuff like that that I talked about in our last video. So let's see how this goes. Okay, the first thing I'm going to fix is I noticed I put the entire bass part in the top voice instead of the bottom voice. So let me fix that quickly. And I'm also going to move this down a little bit just because there's a bunch of Roman numerals in the way. So let me do that. I don't want any of the stems to run into each other. And now let us start adding some inner voices. Okay, I typically do this chord by chord, although sometimes I'll start with the cadences and sort of work my way to there. Let's see. So now, on this first chord, I'm actually going to leave out the fifth at first, and that's because I'm anticipating adding decorations later. So I don't want these both to be exactly the same note, and we can add interest even though it's a 1 followed by a 1 if we do something like this. Now, as you can tell, my lyrics are running into my notes, so I'm going to move all these down by a little bit here, and then here I will move those down as well. Okay, add a little more space between the staves. Unfortunately, finale's spacing by default is really not great. And now let's continue filling in some chords. So this is easy. Now, this is a 4, but I can't... well, I guess the most natural place to go is here. And then this is C sharp E G on this chord. So, Which do I double? Doesn't really matter. Here I want to end on this chord, so let's see what we can do. Yeah, that'll work. Okay. We'll do a quick check for parallels. That's not parallel. No parallels there. These are going up, those are going down, so they can't be. And here, E to F sharp is not it's a sixth, not a fifth. So I think we're good. One thing I'm sort of thinking about as I do this is where we can add some passing notes later and suspensions and stuff, right? So I might actually make this something like this later, right? Kind of like these passing notes. And I might do this, right? And then here I might and then even in the bass, right, we can do something like this. So this first phrase sounds like this. I don't think this passing note right here works because it's an A natural instead of an A sharp. So I'm going to take that back out. But I do kind of want motion in that fourth beat. So what I could do is something like this in the alto instead. Okay, let's continue with the second phrase now. So this is a B minor chord. So this then in the tenor has to be like that. Well, so I could do this, but this is really kind of boring. Keeping those exactly the same and only having the bass move. I don't know. I don't like that too well. So I could switch these parts like that. And then this goes like that. Well, I can't do that because that's parallel fifths. Now I'm leaving the fifth out of this chord. Actually, I can't do that because it's parallel octaves. So something like that, maybe? Or maybe I just change this. So it's And then I can alter the alto part. That's a bit of odd jumping there. I'm not sure I like that very well, but it'll do for now. So let's see how this sounds. Not convinced about that pivot point there. That doesn't sound great to me. Well, we'll see. We'll come back to that later. Oh, and this, I'm missing an E in the chord, so this needs to be an E. Okay, so let's go on. Now we can certainly add some passing notes again. And here. Oh, but that introduces parallel octaves there. So I can't do that. But I could do this. A little neighbor note. I'm not sure about that. I'll leave that out for now. Okay, so let's go on to the next phrase, and we'll tidy this up later. So this pretty much has to be this voicing here. Except, no, it can't be because that's parallels. Okay, so this has to be like this. Oops, and we've got big overlapping stems again, so let's fix that. And here. I think I'm going to do this. I know I'm doubling the fifth, but I can put a passing note on it that sort of makes it a little less bad. And then let's continue this. So oh, I can't do that because that's parallel octaves. So we'll do this instead. I'm not sure how well I like having the bass and tenor move in thirds so many beats like that. Oh, well, you know what? That's a doubled third anyway. So let's do that. Okay, now this is our diminished seventh chord leading us into F sharp minor. So, now I do have an augmented second here, but it's right after a cadence, so you'll actually see that sometimes in Bach too. I'm not too worried about that. honestly am not convinced about this. Two accented passing notes in successive beats. I'm not sure about that. I think I might change that. So maybe this could instead be another 1. 1 and 1 and then a 6. So that's a D major chord. Don't know. Let's try it, see how that works better. In that case, this could be. No, that's parallel motion. And then, okay, that might work. There's also the opportunity for a bunch of passing notes here. We could even have double passing notes here in the tenor. Now, all of these F sharps in a row are kind of boring for the alto, so we might introduce some neighbor notes or something like that later, but we'll come to that in a bit. Okay, finally, let's tackle our last phrase. Now remember, these notes were just placeholders in the alto, so and actually, I think I'm going to make this a 6 instead of a 1. It just adds a little more interest. And I'll change that bass note from a B to a G, which actually makes it not jump around quite as much, which I like as well. Now this is parallel motion, parallel octaves between so it was parallel motion between the bass and the bass and the alto. So I don't like that C sharp to G leap here. So there's a couple of things we could do about that. That's one of them, doubling the third, but I don't really like that. So we could do something tricky like this. And give the C sharp to the tenor. And then let's finish this up. So I'm intentionally putting a suspension in here. And I don't want to move really to a 7 on the same beat as the suspension. So what I'll do is I will put this in here like this. You don't want your suspension resolving when other motion is happening. It sort of obscures that. Okay, now I can put some other passing notes and stuff like that in here. I just realized this is not a 4. So something like that would potentially work. I really don't like this second inversion on the 4, but we'll give it a shot. Okay, so let's see what this sounds like. I don't know if you caught it, but this was missing G sharp. And I'm not totally convinced by this, but one thing I really still don't like is this chord right here. This is not a great... I really don't like this 4 and second inversion here. It's not a good pivot chord into D major. So one thing that we could do is the sort of inverse of what we're doing here and make this our first D major chord. So in that case, it would be something like this. Okay, so we move to D a little earlier. bass. We can do this. And a nice solid A in the bass. So let's try this and see if that fixes it. Okay, there's still a couple things. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to make this a C sharp, and then I can leave this on the A. And not sure I'm convinced by that G there. Maybe it's okay to double the fifth here. Let's try that, see how that sounds. Okay, so there are still a couple of chords that are bothering me. This is one of them, and this is another one of them. But I think in the interest of time, we will call it here, and we'll leave this as is. Now, one thing that we can do after we finish this is we can go back and compare it with the Bach chorale, which I have not looked at up until this point. So now we can see how Bach solved some of those problems that we ran into. Okay, so first I'm actually just going to reduce the size of my layout here so that everything fits on two staves. There we go. Now let's go back to the Bach version and see exactly what he did. Oh, that's interesting. So this actually looks a lot like our version. And then he actually stayed in B major here. No, that's not quite true. He did modulate to D major here, but then he went right back to B major. But then he did start this section in D major. And he ended it in B minor. And then, yes, he modulated to F sharp minor as well here. And then he ended this in A major instead. And then he did that A sharp B thing that we did earlier on. And then he did end up back in B major. So let's see how Bach's version sounds. Well, obviously Bach's version is way better than mine, but that's okay. I'm still learning as well. Now, after you've learned how to write in a sort of Baroque style like this, you can start extending your harmonic vocabulary, and you can come up with other harmonizations of this same material. So here's a couple others I prepared. This first arrangement is in a modern classical style. It's loosely tonal, but has a lot of chromaticism in it, and it intentionally uses parallel fifths a lot. So in the first section, we have the alto, tenor, and bass singing these chromatic sort of sliding notes here, up and then down. And then and they're not really intended to be independent particularly, which is why I'm using parallel fifths, just sort of a homophonic texture moving up and then down. And then in the second section, there aren't any parallel fifths anymore, and the voices are independent, but we are still maintaining this kind of chromatic movement here. And we end here on this basically F sharp major chord, which is the dominant, after starting on the tonic, and the first section ending on the C sharp major 7 chord. And then this next section just sort of plays with some interesting harmonies, ending on an A major 9 chord. And then again, we sort of go back the way we came here with these sort of slithering harmonies down the chromatic scales and up here, ending on this C sharp major-ish chord with a D in it. I initially made this a C sharp, but it just sounded too diatonic. And then we return to the sort of motif at the beginning with the sort of sliding parallel triads here. And then we end on a B minor chord with this sort of F sharp at the very end playing the role of a dominant. So let's see how this sounds. Our second arrangement is in a sort of a reggae style, so it's much faster, and I did change the melody just a little bit, but I mostly changed it rhythmically. So the only other thing I did, other than sort of moving the beats to off beats and stuff like that, was to introduce a couple of little neighbor notes where it needed an extra note on that beat, and I didn't have one in the original. So this is in a very straightforward diatonic style. So let's hear what it sounds like. Now, of course, with voices singing it, it doesn't sound very reggae, but you put this lower line on steel drums and add some shakers and stuff, and it would definitely sound more reggae. Of course, Bach is probably rolling over in his grave at this point, listening to my alternative arrangements, but that's not the point. The point is that you can harmonize in many different styles, not just in Bach harmonization, but that's the foundation for a lot of more modern harmony. Well, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If so, please give it a like on YouTube and help other people find it. If you want to be notified when the last part of this series comes out, make sure you subscribe to this channel to get notified. And as always, please feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions. Until next time, have a good one.